We continue our series today on Father Malachi Martin and the warnings he gave the church. He spent a long time giving warnings about things that have come to pass or in the process of coming to pass. And he has been smeared ruthlessly for this. Smears that don't stand up under scrutiny and are in the process of being actively debunked because his voice is one that is extraordinarily important, even 30 years nearly after his passing. He wrote a book called The Jesuits, and in that book, he explained the state of the Jesuit order and their role in the subversion of the church. He later said he could have called it the religious orders because it would have had the same effect. Thereafter, writing that book and it being published, he was subject to the most vicious smears. This happened in the 1980s. It did not stop him from writing further works and giving numerous interviews with interested parties. And I have a few clips today for you from some of those interviews where he describes in discussion this organization that both smeared him, but also, and he never brings up his own case here. Instead, he talks about their work in trying to subvert the church, an organization he refers to as the Super Force. It's an odd name for it. You have seen Archbishop Vigano, if you've paid attention to his writings, refer to the same group by a different name. This is a confluence of state and secular authorities, as well as with the church. And Malachi Martin here is focusing mostly on the church, this embedded church, to kind of sort of borrow Vigano's term for it. These are the people who are the lifeblood of the operations of the Roman Curia and how they stop virtually any reforms from happening and are continuing to push for essentially the birth of what is now being called the synodal church, a decentralized church where the Pope is mostly a figurehead. It would be the end of the Catholic Church as we know it if they got their way. Here's Malachi Martin talking about this and the mechanism they wanted to use, as you will hear him in some of these various interview clips, is the forced designation of a Roman pontiff, if you can believe it. Something many of us think have come to pass already.
The superstructure of the church is pretty well remaining intact. And we're talking about the Roman Catholic Church. However, the theological structure is pretty well gutting out from inside of it. I mean, literally, it's being stripped of the inside. And so even the dogmas that Dave is talking about aren't in full play, save for possibly a resurgence of Mariology and New Age and other doctrines openly practiced by priests, nuns, and laity. There are also laity in there who haven't the vaguest notion about what these Catholic doctrines are all about. Mm-hmm. Now, what's going to happen? Isn't this church ripe for becoming a world system? Because it's not going to have those old underpinnings, Malachi.
Well, John, to answer you directly and speak with Dave too at the same time, I must tell you that one of the summary dangers we now stand in which we now stand is that indeed the enemy is within the walls, and that given the grip that the anti-church elements have on the choke points of instruction and discipline and regulation in the church, it would be possible, in my mind, calamitously possible, that overnight, as to a liberal, New Age, non-Christian really, but certainly non-Catholic element would take over the governance of the church and pursue its destruction as a Christian institution to the very end.
But probably pursue its own construction as a world religious system.
Of course.
Right. And that's, Dave, is what you've been saying all along, Dave.
That is the danger. But in that case, we are forearmed with both the teaching of popes and the teaching of saints, and with revelation, and we would be reduced to a remnant. And as Paul VI once said, in his last year of life, he was asked by a great friend of his, Jean Guiton, the French writer, could this happen? He said, yes, it can happen. And he said it could be reduced to a small group, infinitesimal in size compared to the billions of human beings. But he said they have to remain because they are the remnant of those who will be saved. And I suppose after that there might be, in God's plan, a resurgence. But to answer your question directly, Johnny, yes. And above all, this thing is all the more horrendous for me because it can take place, as it were, overnight, yes, but without the knowledge of the vast bulk of Catholics.
As I recall, Paul VI on his deathbed was heard to repeat over and over, Credo in unam sanctam catholicam
He won Castle Gandolfo, his villa where he died, in the late July and early, he died on the 6th of August. He was shuffling around. He had horrible phlebitis, by the way. His legs were swollen. And he was always heard repeating Credo nunum Deum Patrum, Credo nunum Ecclesiam Catholicam, repeating this to assure himself of his belief. But he did make that almost prophetic statement that, yes, he said to Jean Guiton, it is possible that within a short time, the believers in the church, in the Roman Catholic structure, would be reduced to an almost infinitesimal number, and evil would take over. Now, I don't ascribe that to the presence of false dogmas and beliefs about Our Lady and about the saints and angels and about the forgiveness of sins and the possibility of getting salvation as Dave would. I ascribe that to the father of lies, Satan.
There is a network which frustrates them. And the fact that they cannot do anything about it means it's powerful, means it has all the levers of power in its hand. And therefore that this is one of the reasons why John Paul II knows all renewal is impossible. He cannot do anything about it. He had to excommunicate Archbishop Lefebvre, instead of going himself to Econ and performing the ordinations, which was his original wish. He couldn't do that. He wouldn't be able to get back to Rome, probably. Because here's the essence of that organization, Bernard, and it's frightening. There is a large body of highly placed clergy, beginning with cardinals, and going down as low as Monsignore, and then into priests, who have one aim in life, and that is to make sure that any exercise of Petrine authority obsolesces and falls into desuetude. And de facto, they have brought church administration to the point that the Pope no longer exercises papal authority, except in a rare case when it's useful to them, the excommunication of Lefebvre. But otherwise, he doesn't exercise it. You see, there are two ways of my getting rid of you. You are with me in the company and you have a job. And I don't like you. I want to eliminate Bernard Jansen. Well, I can try and get your job suppressed and you fired, or I can arrange it so that your job becomes OTOs, becomes pointless. You shuffle papers. You have no influence on company policy. You have nothing to do with the sales of our goods. You have nothing to do with the financial aggrandizement of the company. You sit in your office. You are useless. You have obsolesced. You're in desuetude. Your job is a cynosure. It means nothing. That is the aim of the present superforce, to make sure that the Petrine exercise of those keys ceases. And therefore, that it will be more or less like the ostrich feather fans they used to wave around the Pope when he was on the sedia gestatoria being carried in public. They're just relics of the past. Oh yes, we used to do that, but we don't do it any longer.
In other words, their goal is to make the Pope somewhat like the Queen of England, just a symbol.
Yes, but the ultimate aim is destroy Petrine authority. Destroy the unity of the Church around Peter. And that's the destruction of the Roman Church. That's the aim. And if you examine carefully the behavior of a thing like the Bernardine machine, as we call it in the United States, it's Cardinal Bernardine of Chicago who runs the bishops, the USCC and the NCCP. You'll find that it's always an endeavor to say, well, we Americans think this, we can't adopt the Roman point of view. And the French do the same, and the Spaniards are doing the same, and the Germans and the Belgians, and the Latin Americans are trying, some of them are trying to do the same thing. It's an effort to make sure the Pope does not exercise authority, because once he ceases to exercise it for a amount of time, it obsolesces. He doesn't do that. He has overstepped his authority, as the 173 signers of the Cologne Declaration said. You have no right to do this. You're Bishop of Rome. You administer that. Leave us alone. We can manage our own church in Germany, our own church in America, the Americanist church. That's the aim of it.
If they can and will decide that, or we must have deaconesses, they've decided that. They can decide that against the will of Rome and impose it. Similarly, the French Conference of Bishops, and so on, the Spanish Conference of Bishops, same thing, they want to be independent. It's a new form of an old heresy called Gallicanism, which was condemned as heretical, but now it's come out in this form. And Rome is incapable of doing anything about it at the present moment, because the difficulty is this, that as long as John Paul II is Pope, it's fine. If tomorrow he died and they held a conclave, going down the roster of the papal electors, the cardinal electors, I am not sure we would not find ourselves presented with a modernist pope.
Is that part of the agenda of the modernists, is to get one of their own elected as pope?
Of course. That would be the end then of what they call the papal church, the patriarchal church, the ancient church, which is no longer suitable for the modern world. Tolerates this, tries to maintain a unity, a facade of unity anyway, and hopes that what he's hoping for will happen soon.
Is he aware that there's a problem out there? Does he have good information?
His eyes have been blinded with videos, and his ears have been deafened with audio, and his ears have been filled with accounts of it all. He knows it all, and can do nothing about it. He knows he can't do anything about it. He can rant and rave, he can excommunicate, and create a worse situation than ever. There's no way out. It wouldn't renew the faith. It wouldn't renew a seminary.
So we find a situation where the head of the church is hemmed in and is not really, in the true sense, the head of the church.
He is in the eyes of God, he is in the eyes of believers, but he's not. He's the head of the church without the power. He hasn't got the power. They are hoping they will stop all practice, all attempt to practice the Petrine office, so that it falls into obsolescence, into desuetude, and they can say, well, this has never been done for the last pontificate. The last pope never did this, so why should you do it? Speaking to another Holy Father.
It's to set a precedent.
That's right. And make it one of those relics stuck in a Vatican cellar that once was used and is no longer used. That's the idea of it. And they've come to that point to a large degree. The Pope's voice doesn't really hold in dioceses now, in the United States, for instance, in Canada. It's not what the Pope wants, it's what the local bishop has decided.
The local bishop is really getting the best of both worlds, because he has, to a certain extent, still the authority from Rome. He has the implicit approval of Rome.
That's right.
And yet he can still do everything he likes.
And they regard him as a Polish bishop who's gone astray and ended up as Pope in the church when he should be in a diocese in Krakow in Poland, hidden away. Got him meddling with affairs that he shouldn't meddle with, and imposing his conservative views on a church which is trying desperately to advance and join humanity and be part of the human race. So he has enemies, dire enemies. Or failing getting him out of office, they want him to retire. After all, he's 70. 5 more years. He, by the way, according to canon law, can retire, resign, and nobody need ask him a reason, and he'd give a reason to nobody. It's in canon law. And they would like him to declare 75, but he's retiring. Because of old age, because of ill health, and because he has outlived his usefulness and he can help the church in other ways, and then put in their own man. But they forget one factor. He is the personal representative of Jesus. And believe me, Bernard, there is nobody more vengeful than Jesus when it comes to what belongs to him. And there's nothing he prizes more than his church. And nothing in the church he prizes more than Peter, on whom he built the church. And those who are now tampering with the papacy and tampering with the Petrine office and planning to get rid of the last man who stands as a guard over it, they are facing a Christ who is full of wrath and anger, not forgiveness, not compassion. You have touched the very reason he came on earth. And that promises for them a terrible punishment. Also for us, because we happen to belong on the same caravan in history. But the caravan which is wending its way towards a crossroads where I think the times of Satan are finished, and we're going to see a time of surcease and peace for the church for a while, until the last big struggle comes. And that's Antichrist. And that's the end of all.
Thank you, Father, for participating.
The first clip you heard there was from an interview he did with John Lasseter back in like 1991 on a show called Steel on Steel. Something you might want to look up. You can find that one on YouTube pretty easily. The second and the longer clips are from various interviews that Malachi Martin did with Bernard Jansen. You can find those clips for sale on the Triumph Communications website or in print form from them as well. I have a link to that in my show notes today at returntotradition.org for your consideration. Mr. Jansen is still out there doing that work, and it is good for you to support him as you can if you are so inclined. But I'm curious what you think of this. Does this sound familiar? These interviews were given in the 1990s, ladies and gentlemen. The 1990s. He warned us 30 years before it happened. I wonder what he would have to say about synodality, the synodal church, and the attempts by the authorities in Rome to essentially give away everything to various schismatic groups and attempt to bring them back into communion with their new synodal church, including Petrine authority, if you've been paying attention. But let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.